Picture a country where a third of the land sits below sea level. Its busiest airport, handling tens of millions of travelers a year, sits on the floor of a drained lake, 4 meters under the ocean's surface. Its lowest point dips almost 7 meters beneath the waves. By every rule of nature, this place should be seabed. Switch off the pumps, and within days, seabed is exactly what it would become again. And yet nearly 18 million people live here, not just surviving, but thriving, in one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. This is the Netherlands, a country that has spent 1,000 years at war with the sea, and against every odd is still winning. Today, how the Dutch built their own country by hand, how the world's most sophisticated flood defense system actually works, the night the sea broke through and took thousands of lives, the truth behind the boy who supposedly plugged a dam with his finger, and why, after centuries of reclaiming land, the Dutch have suddenly started giving it back. There's an old European saying, "God created the world, but the Dutch created the Netherlands." It's only half a joke. The name Netherlands literally means low lands. This is a river delta, where several of Europe's great rivers, the Rhine among them, empty into the North Sea. For millennia, those rivers dumped silt and sand here, while thick peat built up in the marshes, leaving flat, spongy ground barely above the waterline, a world of swamps and tides. The Romans found the locals living on artificial mounds, gathering firewood from whatever the tide washed up. Unable to stop the floods, people simply lifted their homes above them, piling earth basket by basket. Hundreds of these mounds still exist, some still holding churches and farms. The fight began nearly 2,000 years ago. About 1,000 years ago, the Dutch went on the offensive, walling off land with the first dikes. And since a dike protects everyone behind it, one careless owner could drown his neighbors too. Communities formed water boards, elected bodies that taxed, inspected, and enforced dike upkeep. These boards still exist today, older than the Dutch state itself, and their elections still run alongside national ones. For centuries, every resident was also obligated to defend the dikes in a crisis, a volunteer duty that technically still exists. Many historians credit this constant negotiation with water for the Dutch talent for compromise and consensus. Keeping water out was only half the job. The rest had to be pumped out from inside. And that's the real job the windmill did, turning a wheel that lifted water into a canal, draining it to sea. This gave rise to the polder, land ringed by dikes, drained by canals and pumps, governed by one rule: the pumping never stops. Starting in the 1400s, the Dutch drained entire lakes this way, windmill by windmill. That's how Haarlemmermeer Lake became the ground beneath Schiphol Airport, whose name literally means ship's grave. You can still see rows of these windmills at Kinderdijk, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Today, thousands of automated pumping stations do the work instead, running around the clock. There's a catch, though. Drained peat shrinks and sinks. So the more the Dutch drain, the lower the land sinks, and the harder the pumps must work forever after. The whole country measures itself from one reference point, the Amsterdam Ordnance Datum, a mark of average sea level so useful that much of Europe adopted it too. Elevations in Germany or Austria are, quietly, measured from Amsterdam's water level. For centuries, the system held, until the night of January 31st into February 1st, 1953, when a violent storm met an unusually high tide on the North Sea. Old, underfunded dikes gave way in dozens of places at once, flooding the sleeping southwestern provinces. Families woke to rising water and climbed onto rooftops as old brick homes collapsed. Phone lines died, and many towns fought the disaster in total isolation, aided largely by amateur radio operators relaying calls for help. Fishermen, soldiers, and volunteers rescued whoever they could. More than 1,800 people died, and hundreds of thousands lost their homes. One true story from that night. When a dike protecting the densely populated heart of the country broke, a local mayor convinced a ship's captain to ram his barge into the breach. The hull wedged into the gap, slowing the flood just long enough for workers to seal it with sandbags, saving the country's most populated region. Weeks later, a commission ruled, "This must never happen again, whatever the cost." That verdict produced the Delta Works, a network of dikes, locks, and barriers across the Southwest, later named one of the seven wonders of the modern world. Two structures stand out. The Eastern Scheldt Barrier, 9 kilometers of movable steel gates, was built after fishermen and environmentalists refused to let engineers seal the bay completely, since it would have killed its unique tidal ecosystem. The result? A much costlier compromise where the gates stay open in calm weather and close only for storms. The Maaslint Barrier, protecting Rotterdam's port, uses 2 floating gates the size of the Eiffel Tower lying on its side, which sail out and sink into place automatically whenever computers predict dangerous flooding, no human involved in the decision. Alongside the concrete, the Delta Works gave the world a new safety standard. Dutch dikes in the most populated areas are built to survive a storm that statistically happens once every 10,000 years, far stricter than anywhere else on Earth. Every dike is registered, inspected, and reinforced constantly. The real defense isn't heroics, it's relentless maintenance. Even earlier, the Dutch had sealed off the Zuiderzee, a sea inlet in the north, with a 32-kilometer dike, turning it into the freshwater IJsselmeer Lake. Fishing villages that had lived off that sea for centuries lost their livelihoods overnight, and the former island of Urk found itself stranded inland once the surrounding water was drained. On the exposed seabed, the Dutch then built entirely new land, the province of Flevoland, the largest man-made island on Earth. Archaeologists found hundreds of shipwrecks buried in that seabed, and farmers there still occasionally plow up old ships' timber in the middle of a wheat field. Much of the country's famous tulip fields grow on ground that was open sea barely a century ago. Now the myth everyone knows. A boy who found a leak in a dike, plugged it with his finger, and saved the country by standing there all night. The Dutch themselves never told this story until an American author invented it in a 19th century children's novel. Tourists kept asking for the boy's statue, so the Dutch eventually built a few, just for visitors. Engineering-wise, the story doesn't even hold up. A finger can't stop water that's already found a way through. The real heroes were the anonymous builders and wardens who did the unglamorous work for centuries. And no, Amsterdam doesn't float like Venice. It stands on millions of piles driven into the ground, including over 13,000 beneath the royal palace alone. For decades, this looked like a finished victory. But in recent decades, the Dutch have started giving land back to the water on purpose. It's not surrender, it's strategy. Climate change is raising seas and intensifying storms, and engineers realize dikes can't just keep getting taller forever. The taller the wall, the worse its eventual failure. So a program called Room for the River moved dikes further inland, giving rivers room to flood safely instead of threatening cities, even if it meant buying out farms and relocating families. Some old polders were deliberately reflooded as reservoirs. Rotterdam built plazas that double as flood basins, and entire neighborhoods of floating houses now rise and fall with the water on sliding piles. Engineers even built an artificial sand peninsula, the sand motor, and let ocean currents spread it naturally along the coast, feeding beaches without machinery. Dutch flood expertise is now an export. Their engineers advise New Orleans, New York, Jakarta, and Venice. The country plans its defenses a century ahead and treats the enormous cost as insurance, since most of its economy sits behind those dikes. If the pumps ever truly stopped, the land would flood within days, and the map would roll back 1,000 years within a few more. The Netherlands only exists as long as the pedaling never stops, and in 1,000 years, it never has.